Recently, I made some killer Italian beef sandwiches using my Grainfather brewing system and the Blackstone griddle. If you want to see more about how it turned out, stick around. Hello everyone and welcome back. Occasionally I get requests from some of you out there to do more food pairing videos where I combine my home brewing hobby with my cooking hobby. Well, this is one of those videos, although it may not be the kind of video that you are asking for where I pair a homebrew with food. What I'm doing in this video is actually cooking food on my brewing equipment. A little different for sure, but it's in the same spirit nonetheless. And what I did is decide to make some Italian beef sandwiches, cooking it sous vide style on my Grainfather. Now, if you don't have a Grainfather, this is not a Grainfather specific video. This can be done on any sous vide system. In fact, I've done videos of sous vide cooking in the past, and I've even used my old Brew Pico Pro little brew system to do sous vide. A couple of videos on that in the past on my channel. So if you haven't seen that, you can go back and watch those. I'll put links to those down below too. I've also got a sous vide stick, and if you have one of those and in a large enough container, you can do this in that as well. I just figured, since I was doing a very large roast, a 6-pound round roast, by the way, it was too big to fit in any of my other vessels, and I didn't want to have to keep refilling water into a regular pot with my immersion stick that way. I wanted to let this thing run overnight on its own. And so I said, well, why not use the Grainfather? It's large enough, right? So that's what I did. Or even if you don't have a sous vide cooker, you can do it the traditional style. I've done a video on that already, which I'll put a link to down below, using a different cut of meat on my Kamado grill or in the oven. I posted a number of social media clips on this cook, I think about a week or so ago. I had a lot of interest in there as to wanting to see the full process rather than little bits and pieces as I was posting them. So here's the full video. You asked for it, and here it is. So let's get on with it. So the first thing you need is a cut of beef, obviously. A beef roast, usually around the 3-pound range is where you get them. The one I bought was a 6-pounder because it's a round eye roast. Now there's a few different traditional cuts of roast that are used in Italian beef sandwiches, with sirloin roast being a popular one, but more commonly at fast food joints, it's more of the slightly cheaper round roast variety, which are the top or bottom roasts. The one I'm using is a round eye roast, and mine's a 6-pounder, whereas you're probably going to buy a smaller cut, maybe 3 pounds, but really it's your recipe, your family, buy as big of a roast as you need. I like to have leftovers after going through this whole process, so I got the biggest roast I could find. You also need a sous vide device. Like I mentioned, this is what this is, a sous vide style cooking method. Again, you can do this on a grill, a smoker, an oven, right? But this video is specific to sous vide. So what you need is a sous vide device. Now, I happen to have a number of devices around the house for doing sous vide. This video, I'm going to use my Grainfather for one, because why not, right? I've never done sous vide on my Grainfather yet, although I've been meaning to do it for a couple of years. So it's due. Also, with the cut of meat I have, it's pretty large, right? So I could do this in a large pot on my stove with a sous vide immersion recirculator stick, right? But there's a lot of water evaporation that takes place doing that method, and you have to constantly top off the water. And this thing's going to cook for about 18 hours or more, so I didn't want to have to keep doing that. I wanted a device with a lid on top, like the Grainfather, so that's what I chose to go with. Plus, it sounds like it'd be something neat to try. So with the Grainfather specifically, what I did is take the mash pipe or the mash basket and take what's normally the bottom mesh piece out with the pipe work. I took it out of there and put the top mesh piece down in the bottom as the bottom to hold the roast in the mash basket. Now I used the mash basket for a few different reasons. One is I didn't want to put it right in the open vessel and possibly have it sink down to the bottom to the heat elements and scorch and melt and burn the plastic bag, right? That's no good. And it makes it easier to pull the roast out of the basket later if I so choose to do it that way. So I put the mash basket in, poured in some water, several gallons worth, enough to submerge your meat. and I heated it up to about 135 degrees for a good medium rare. Some people might go 130, some people might go whatever. 135 is what I chose for this run, and it turned out great, so just keep that in mind. While the water was heating up, I went ahead and trimmed the roast. Now, there's gonna be some excess fat on your roast, so you don't need all that fat, really. So you trim it off. You don't get it all off. Just the thicker cuts, the thicker chunks of fat, just slice them right on off there. And then I rub the roast in a spice mixture. Now, this spice mixture for this recipe, I actually did borrow online from Amazing Ribs from Meathead over there. He's a Chicago area guy too, I believe, so he understands beef sandwiches, so I trust his recipe over others I find online. I have my own recipe that I used in my previous Italian beef recipe video, but that was more with fresh herbs and garlic. This is more of a dry powder rub. And a word about the rub is, I'll put the recipe down in the video description for all the rub ingredients. But something to keep in mind is that if you plan on using high salt beef bouillon cubes or some kind of a very salty broth later, you should leave out the salt in this rub. I used a slightly better quality beef base paste, which was called Better Than Bouillon. It's salt in it, yes, but not as salty as the cubes. So just beware when you mix up the rub, what you tend to use for salt later in your recipe in the juice or the gravy, and adjust your salt content in the rub accordingly. So once the meat's all rubbed up, you put it in your sous vide bag. Now, there's a couple ways to do it. You can put the roast in an actual sous vide or a vacuum sealing bag and use a vacuum sealer to suck all the air out. That's the best method. But for such a large cut of meat like mine, I didn't have a sous vide bag large enough to hold it. So another option is to use a Ziploc style bag. And I had like a 2-gallon or so size bag that this roast fit right on into. Whichever way you go, you put the bag into the water bath, okay? Now, if you're doing vacuum sealing, you just dunk it right on there and let it sink at the bottom, that's fine. I had to be a little bit more careful because these Ziploc tops are not completely 100% waterproof, right? And I didn't want any of that bath water getting into my bag, so I had to suspend the bag, the seal part of the bag above the water line, just so I don't have that happen. So what I did, I came up with a little way of using a binder clip, some tie straps, and the Grainfather lid and mash basket lift handle to come up with a way to go ahead and suspend that bag slightly above the water line. There's probably other ways to do it too, but that's what I did in an impromptu manner. And to top it all off, I turned on the recirculation pump on the Grainfather, mainly because with the sous vide sticks, they're immersion bath kind of cooking devices. They circulate the hot water around the device, so there aren't any hot spots in different parts of the bath. And I went along with that same mindset, and so I used the recirculation pump in the Grainfather to recirculate the water through. Whether that was important or not, I think it might be, but I could be wrong, but that's what I did. Then I walked away for 18 hours. So I put this on, I think, in the afternoon on a Saturday or a Friday, I don't even remember. I think it was a Friday or Saturday. The following day, the following morning, I was able to pull it off and pull it out of the Grainfather. It had a lot of juices in the bag too, man. I mean, this was the entire garage. This is where I'm at now, is in my garage. It smelled great. I carefully removed the roast from the bag and put it on a drying rack, right? Now, there's two things I wanted to do here. I wanted to cool it, obviously, a little bit because I didn't want to go right to the sear that I'm going to do in a minute here and kind of overcook too much of the outer part of the meat. I wanted to chill it down first, so when I sear it, it'll sear just the outside and not really turn the hard-earned pink meat gray more than I had to. But also, I want to give it time to air dry because if you pull this thing right out of the bag and throw it in a hot pan to brown it, you're going to have a really hard time getting the brown on there without overcooking the meat because water's got to evaporate before it can brown the meat. And if there's moisture and water on the outside of the meat, you're actually cooking it before it even browns. I didn't want that. I wanted to air dry the meat. So what I did is I put a small little fan blowing across the meat as I air dried on the rack for up to an hour just to get the outside to dry and for the meat to cool as well, of course. So when it came time to brown it, you have a few options, right? The default obvious choice is to use a cast iron pan over some high heat, either on your grill or on your stove. But since I'm out in my garage already and I have the Grainfather right here and my Blackstone flat top griddle that I've been using a lot this past several months since I got it, I decided to go ahead and use the flat top griddle to brown it because it's just the right size for this long 6-pound roast. So I heated up the Blackstone and poured on some olive oil to keep the meat from sticking too much when I go to brown it. I went ahead and started browning it on all sides. So you take the hunk of meat and some tongs and you make sure you hold it over the hot surface to brown every corner of the meat that you can get browned. It was pretty easy with this cut because it was pretty straight and flat and cylindrical. So I just kept turning it and turning it and turning it. Then I got the ends, of course, as well. And after the meat's been browned and put on a rack to cool a little bit, I went ahead and went back to the griddle to deglaze it because there's a lot of great flavor still now almost burnt onto the surface. So what you do is that you deglaze the pan with some kind of liquid. Anything that's flavorful will be great. Beef broth, since you're going to be using it later, would work. I just use water. And that worked great. You put the water on there and you get all that burnt stuff up and off the griddle. You scrape it all off and you keep that liquid. You save it. So with a cast iron pan, obviously you just dump it into a Pyrex bowl or someplace, or after it's been cooled, pour it into a container. But since I had my little grease drip tray, that worked out great. I just moved all that liquid over to the corner and into the grease tray, and that was my liquid. So that's my deglazing liquid. Now you save that for later, so you let it cool, put it in the fridge. And when the meat's cooled sufficiently, wrap it up in some plastic wrap really nice and tight and throw it in the fridge as well. The point of putting the meat in the fridge at this point is to chill it down and firm it up for slicing later. If you go right to slicing, you're going to be disappointed in the results you get. The meat's going to be mushy, hard to slice because it's going to give with the blade, right? You want to firm up the meat in the fridge for at least a few hours so when you come to slice it later, it will shave really nice and thin. Now on to the gravy. Yes, gravy, not juice. Don't get me started, you guys. It's technically a gravy, not a juice, because gravy by definition is it's a flavorful liquid, a sauce basically with meat drippings in it. And what are we going to do? We're going to be putting meat drippings in this. So it is technically a gravy. Feel free to voice your opinion in the comments down below about that topic. I'd like to see what you think. So you take the meat drippings, the deglazing liquid that you used to deglaze your pan or griddle, and you put them on the stove top and you add some additional beef bouillon or beef broth to it to make it stretch further. I used about 6 cups of beef bouillon broth that I made to augment and stretch these meat drippings further. Of course, I have a 6-pound roast. You may use less. You may want more. It depends on the type of beef sandwich you want. There's different ways to making beef sandwiches. You can obviously just do the beef dry on the sandwich, which is, or you can ladle some of this gravy over the top of the beef sandwich, which is more typical. But if you're like myself, I like my whole sandwich dunked in the juice, or baptized, some places call it, where the whole sandwich is submerged under the liquid and then pulled out and wrapped up for you to go or put on your plate. That's really messy, by the way. Oh, but it's so good. When the meat's cooled down in the fridge for a few hours, you can pull it out now and unwrap it and start the slicing process. And I would suggest using a meat slicer, because that's the traditional way of serving Italian beef. Now, I've done it differently in the past, as I've mentioned already in my video with the chuck roast option with the fresh herbs. The chuck roast option falls apart all by itself and therefore doesn't even need a slicer. But for this video, the cut of meat I've chosen, you really want to use a slicer. Now, when you're slicing it, beware of the thickness of your slicer settings. Right now, the goal, typically with an oven-baked Italian beef roast, is that you cut it as thin as you can, almost shaving it, because it's a tough cut of meat, and the thinner you cut it, the less chewy it is, the more tender it feels when you bite into it, right? But since we're doing this sous vide style, the sous vide process has already tenderized that meat perfectly. In fact, a little bit too much. In fact, you want to open up the slicer settings a little bit to cut a thicker slice, because if it's too thin, all you end up with is mush and meat that's kind of falling apart on the slicer. And to get a traditional look and feel of a Chicago-style Italian beef sandwich, you want slices. So opening up that slicer setting a little bit would help you out with that. And it's not as much of a concern because it is that tender. Just look how perfectly pink it is from edge to edge, and each slice just sort of hangs there, and it just melts in your mouth. Man, so good. I want to do this again. Another optional step, which I have done in this recipe and shown in some overlays, is making up some sweet peppers. Now, I used in this video some Melrose peppers. Now, for those who don't know what those are, I don't blame you. They are a local Chicagoland variety. They actually originated locally from Melrose Park, which is a west suburb right outside the city, from Italian immigrants who came over from Italy decades ago. And so it's a Italian sweet frying pepper, basically, is what it is. But if you have green peppers, whatever, it's your recipe, your palate. Work with what you got. Another option is to use some giardiniera, which is also a traditional Italian beef topping. Now that's a lot hotter. That's more of a pickled mix of different vegetables all put together. That's very spicy and very zesty. And to me, my personal preferred choice for peppers. But I had a whole bunch of these Melrose peppers from my garden that I kept in my freezer all winter, and I needed to use them up. And I didn't regret it because they did turn out really darn good. I went ahead and seeded them, covered them in some olive oil, and I fried them on my Blackstone griddle. Because I had it out already. You can do it on your stovetop too, it doesn't matter. Or you can roast them on the grill, and I do that a lot too. All right, now we're almost ready to eat. Now what you need now for a sandwich is the sandwich bread. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Italian beef sandwich, it can be really drippy, messy, and wet, basically, right? Because of all the juice that you put on top or dunk the meat in. So not any roll or bread will work. What you really want is a high gluten content roll. And traditionally around Chicagoland, that generally falls into a few different brands out there that you can just buy them at the store. I'm using Turano brand rolls, right? High gluten rolls. You can also, a better or equivalent one around here is Gonnella. That's also another brand. They're harder to find. A lot of the restaurants actually have those, and from us consumers, they're harder to find. The Turano is more commonly found. But if you're not in the area and you're somewhere else, just make sure the rolls you buy are not just plain old French rolls or whatever. You want something that's got a high gluten content. That helps keep the bread from getting soggy and falling apart and collapsing upon itself. With these high gluten rolls, the bread really does hold its shape a lot better and hold the juice in as well. So now that you got the bread, now you can go ahead and assemble the sandwich. So what you could do is what I did in this video is that I take the sliced Italian beef that's still medium rare. I go ahead and I dunk it and soak it in the hot gravy for several seconds, maybe up to half a minute tops, to get it nice and wet and warmed up. And then you put it under the bun. Then you can ladle on some of the gravy or dunk the whole sandwich, your option. Top it with the peppers, sweet or hot, or both. And optionally some cheese. Now, some cheeses that we like to use, personally, I like to use more of a cheese with flavor. A lot of you like to use mozzarella. Personally, to me, it's got hardly no flavor, and it stretches to all heaven when you're trying to bite into it, and it's just not, to me, not the best cheese. The best cheese, in my opinion, is something that's got a little bit of a nutty flavor that doesn't, a little bit of a tang, like Asiago or a Fontina cheese would work really well with this. But it's your choice, your option. Use what you have available. And there's your sandwich. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, it took overnight. It took a 2-day window basically to prepare this, right? So that's why I chose a larger hunk of meat. What I actually ended up doing is that I actually cut the roast in half. So 3 pounds of the 6-pound roast, I vacuum sealed that and froze that in my freezer along with a couple pint jars worth of the leftover gravy. So in the future, I can just reheat the beef sandwich, slice it up, and have more sandwiches without having to go through this process again. So I hope you liked the video and what I had to share within it. If you're a new viewer and not yet a subscriber, consider subscribing. I do food videos like this as well as brewing videos, some DIY content around food and cooking and brewing as well, and some reviews here and there. So if that floats your boat, go ahead and click that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. And everyone else, including you, new viewers, thanks for coming out, thanks for hanging out, and I will talk to you all next time.